So welcome everybody. We're working with Pathwork Lecture 258, which is titled Personal Contact with Jesus Christ, Positive Aggression, and the Real Meaning of Salvation. And I didn't read this whole thing through, but I was kind of called a little bit with the beginning of the lecture, and I can't remember what else brought me to it. So I don't know if other people have had a chance to look at it. But let me just read his blessing and we'll open it up for sharing and then see where we want to go with it. So he says, joyfully I bring divine blessings that can touch everyone here in a very vital way. You need to raise your consciousness to this reality. You need to remove the barriers that prevent you from perceiving the Lord's presence in your life, his love for you. So let's go ahead and just open up to see if anybody read it or just how that first line strikes people or whatever is up.
I listened to it. I generally don't listen to the lectures, but I listened to Gary read this one. Actually at about 4 o'clock in the morning because I woke up and couldn't sleep. So I thought, oh, I'll read the lecture. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. I think I'll just listen to the lecture. And, for me, it's sort of like a continuation of 21. Isn't 21 the plan of salvation?
Somewhere in there.
What came to me was, as I was listening to the lecture, was of course, the guide kept saying that Jesus was the physical incarnation of God, of the Godhead of God. And he is your personal guide, personal, and also like how do I put this? He was the proof that you could have nothing but faith and be taken care of. He lived it. It was like, that was so, the point that he kept making in the lecture was that, not my will, but thy will be done. And what part of your small self-will is it that keeps holding on and saying that, no, I have a better plan. I'm not giving over completely to this, your will. I have a better plan. My plan's a little safer than your plan, and I'm going to hold on to it and keep it safe. But I also got, what came to me was, okay, so let's say you want to learn how to play the violin. Well, you're going to get a violin and you're going to find a teacher. Unless you want to hash it out on your own. But if you find a teacher, you're going to learn how to play the violin. Well, if you're a human being, you need a teacher in order to make it through this experiment. And there's your teacher, ready and waiting for you. That's sort of what I got out of it.
Great. Anyone else?
So I still have a bit of a trigger around the word aggression, even though I'm probably one of the most aggressive people I know in many areas of my life. I'm trying to really, I get the concept mentally of positive aggression, and I feel that I understand it to be grounded, solid, trusting, complete faith, love, wisdom that is unaltering, truth, all these magnificent qualities.
Uh-huh.
That feels good just saying that. I personally feel that I feel very blessed that I have frequent experiences with Jesus as my teacher. And he's always been so patient, and the wisdom. And I just want to share one of my visions. And as I've said, these things go on for months, and sometimes they'll disappear for a while and come back. But one is at this place, I call it the Basin of Boulders, and I'm just sitting there. It's probably my idealized self is just sitting there with the feet dangling over, and Jesus is sitting at another area with his feet dangling over. And my idealized self will hear this battle way off in the distance. And I get up and I want to run off to fight. And over again, Jesus invites me to just keep sitting with him. And I run off to the battle, and I come back days or weeks or whatever later, and I sit with him again, and I hear another battle, and I run off. And this went on for the longest time. And he's always just sitting there when I'm getting ready to run off. He again invites me to consider to just sit there with him. And after months and months, if not a year of this intermittently happening, I'm really feeling solid sitting there with him, despite whatever battles I might be imagining off in the distance. And my trust is building more and more. His faithfulness. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I've read this lecture many times. I didn't have time to read it before tonight for this interaction. I will, I'm sure, get much from it listening to everybody else's sharing.
Great.
Hey everyone.
Okay.
So I listened to this lecture this morning, and I wouldn't call my reactions triggers around this necessarily, but I do find myself closed maybe to some concepts, and there's a part of me that maybe before would kind of have a reaction in a direction of like almost like an allergic reaction. But now I'm noticing that I just maybe just let it just be in the background, and I assume that I don't understand, or maybe there's something that I'm just not quite picking up the way that is being described or is being meant. And so there's definitely more openness there, even though, I can still feel like there's some barriers to certain words, certain concepts, or just not really being able to put experience or emotional vision kind of to certain words. So yeah, it's been a while since I listened to this lecture, and re-listening to it showed some of those dynamics to me. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say on that for now.
Okay, great. Mm-hmm.
And hey, I don't really have anything to share at the moment. I did not read the lecture beforehand. I actually haven't been getting the emails, which I think, a while back I'd been teaching yoga classes on this night, so that made sense. But during quarantine, not doing that. So if I could get the emails again, that would be awesome.
Okay, I'll have to double check because I thought your name was on there.
Maybe it's possible I didn't see it, but
You might want to check in your spam folder or something too. It might be going there.
okay.
And I'll double check and make sure you're on the list. So, okay, yeah. So, and like I said, I hadn't completely read it, but I think, partly I was drawn because it's like, there's a way in which a lot of the path work, has to do with our purification and, our, work on the lower self and that kind of thing. And then our images, right? And so this seems to me a little bit of a also continuation of, the God image, because in that, the guide is saying that God is both person and principle. And I think for most of us that are sort of more new age oriented and a lot of times, recovering Christians in some sense, or, working with some of the distortions of churchianity, right, that this can, come in, in a little bit of a sideways sense, or, we react to it. And then other people do have this really deep connection, spiritually. So I think it kind of covers a large range, but I felt like in my journey, even being open to Jesus and all of that, there was a shift that happened around this understanding, which was kind of what I got when I read the first part of this, about what happens when we feel God's love for us, right? And so Jesus, being the personal aspect of God, allows us to personify and feel sort of that there is, like a specific personal love for us, right? Whereas, we can say God is great and God is beautiful and God is, wise and, like all of these sort of collective, larger, sort of aspects of God in his principle and his consciousness and his energy and his, creation, all these forms, her, his, her. But there's a kind of need, I think, that we have at some level that shifts things in our journey when we can feel this personal connection. And it may not be necessarily Jesus, although the Pathwork Guide really does, recommend, that. But I find that, it can be, the divine feminine principle, maybe, the divine mother, we could have a sense of a relationship with, or, maybe, Mary Magdalene, or maybe, some other, Buddha, or, another spiritual teacher that feels somehow, like connected. But let's go ahead and get into this, and let me see what the guide has to say, because he may contradict some of what I'm saying here. She says, let me start this lecture with some words on feeling God's presence. Even though you have strengthened your faith and your realization that this world is infused with God. So, it's like, that's how, like I feel God in nature, and God in all of these principles and beauties and, and dynamics, but there is a shift or a difference in that personal contact. So then he says, that God did incarnate, right? And God, like he says, okay, so Jesus is different than God, right? So here in the cosmology lectures, he does make a distinction and says that, Jesus is not God, right? But Christ was the first, incarnated being and contained most of the substance. And then Jesus was the man who incarnated most fully the Christ, right? And so maybe if we think of the Christ here, and maybe for Eva, like this was her last lecture, right? And maybe for her, this connection with Jesus and his presence was coming in a way like that. So it doesn't really speak to that, but it's interesting to me that it shifted, more from the Christ to, this very personal aspect of a human being, right? And we do understand that love, which is what the Christ consciousness is, was incarnate in Jesus, right? And so in that sense, you know, this man, this being that incarnated, you know, represented the fullness of God's love, right? And demonstrated that is one way I would say it. So he says, for most believers, God is a much less personal, a much more vague and general experience. And you know that you can experience only that which you can conceive of and believe in. So if you seriously long, pray, and search for a realization of Jesus Christ's personal love for you, the answers will come forth. Perhaps you will not recognize the first answers as such. They may have something to do with the barriers, right, that are there.
Mm-hmm.
So he says also we're involved in a vicious circle where, and this I think is very important, you know, where we feel like sort of to present ourselves and feel a personal connection with a divine being, you know, of great worth like that, you know, it's like, it's where we feel our unworthiness, right? And then of course, if we feel our unworthiness or unlovable unacceptableness, then we can't really feel this love that comes to us from spirit, and it's always coming to us, right? It's a resource that we desperately need and can use, and life becomes so much more fulfilling and full when we can receive it. But again, the kind of issue is that we have to reestablish our own self-acceptance and self-respect.
Mm-hmm.
And he says this is done when we recognize and oust real justified guilt without annihilating ourselves in the process. The self-condemnation that so often accompanies insight into your lower self obstructs the cleansing and liberating process that makes room for self-love in a healthy sense. And in some ways, you know, this is connected with too much pride, right? You know, like sort of the poor self-worth, or, you know, that can be, you know, the shame can be like the flip side, right? You know, because we feel like, you know, we should be, and, you know, and so there's a kind of way that I think often, if we can just show up in our deep humility, right? Acknowledging that we are children of God, that we you know, are one with the Creator, that our essence is this love, is this, you know, intelligence, is this, you know, wisdom, and this light, and that, you know, we are also, you know, fallen human covered with ungodlike substance, right? But if we anchor our true identity in, you know, like the potentiality and the essential nature of our godness, then we can present ourselves fully, even with our, you know, imperfections, and ask God to help us, you know, tell God our choice, right, is to transform and to heal all of that, and by presenting and coming forward in that form, you know, I think that there is a way that then we can also receive that from him and feel better, you know, in ourself, realize that some of our shame is a distortion, right? You know, and in some ways we can never be perfect enough to feel deserving of everything that, you know, we have here, and including our life, you know, our very life. So says, so what you need is a continuous double approach that combines your determination to search for and face all of your lower self, and to understand all of your being with compassion and realism, with your direct prayer and deep desire to feel Jesus' presence near you, his concern for you, his deep abiding interest in every smallest detail of your life. So let me pause there. How are people, like, is this, you know, anybody having the reactions come up, or questions, or, you know, issues with this concept that we're looking at now? Or want to double down?
Of course, you would always you know, your mind immediately is like, okay, wait a minute here. Billions and billions of people, and this guy's going to be concerned about even the smallest detail of everyone's life.
Mhm.
How is that even possible? You know, how is that even possible?
Yeah, exactly. So does anybody want to chime in on that? Or I mean, you know, I think it's part of the mystery in some ways, right? You know, and I've heard some different, you know, potential explanations, but you know, it feels like that's a part of the, you know, the place where okay, so I'm just one among billions, you know, and yet, you know, part of, I think it is like we are all connected in that space of oneness, right? Somehow. And we are all, you know, related and in relationship with each other. And so certainly with Christ.
Yeah, you know, later on in the lecture, the guide says you can't do this alone. So, you know, you get yourself surrounded with or into a group of people, like-minded people on the same search, and your intention is to make yourself vulnerable and speak your truth. And in the process of doing that, I think that what happens is what you need is like given to you through the other people, you know. And in that way, this is how this amazing thing of even the smallest detail can be addressed, you know. So you bring up some small little detail in your life, and all of a sudden there's someone else in the group who's like, you know, got an explanation or has some insight for you. And where does this person's insight come from? Well, who knows? Maybe some ray from the spirit world, or you know. But
Yeah.
you have to be willing. You have to be willing to put yourself in that situation where you will expose your truths. And I always say that, you know, your truth is your mess. That's what your real truth is. Your truth is the mess that you carry around, and what you keep trying to hide and cover up and put a mask over, and that's your truth, you know?
Yeah. And the truth is also, you know, the essence of your you know, your inner being. And I think, yeah, like what you're saying makes sense. Like there's a way in some sense that we're trying to understand. And I think like if we can fully feel this love, this personal love, that we are fundamentally held, loved, blessed, you know, by the divine mother, father, you know, creator, Jesus, whatever, that there's this way that then when we feel the fullness of that love, we become that love, right? You know, it's like, it's what we're seeking. It's, you know, and we're, you know, struggling with it with our brothers and sisters, and that creates, you know, the pride, self, will, and fear. And yet on another level, if we're living that love, if we're infused with that love, and we're in this movement of giving and sharing that level, we become the second coming. We become the Christ on earth.
Mm.
You know, as we become present, as we become more fully, you know, in our hearts, then yes, that Christ comes through each of us. And then I think there's also this understanding of, in the astral, maybe some of the ways that the shamanic, you know, or sort of spiritist culture looks at it is, you know, Jesus has a whole army of beings under his command, right? You know, there's this, you know, all of our own personal guides, perhaps, you know, like many saints and other divine beings of the celestial court, right? That know the law of love and that, you know, orient. So, you know, Buddha is there, and, you know, all of the beings in a sense are under this evolutionary force of love. And so, you know, we might, you know, receive guidance, you know, some kind of sense of love entering into us, of peace, of harmony, you know, when we need it, when we're seeking it. And, you know, we often talk when we're calling in energies, you know, in our circles and stuff, of the, you know, the divine beings or the angels, of those qualities, right? So those are also, you know, aspects of the Christ in some sense. You know, all of the angels are the divine qualities that he possesses in various, you know, personified forms. And so I think, you know, there is a way that energetically we can answer that question of, you know, how can he love each one of us, you know, maybe that through all of his emissaries, right? You know, that happens, including us.
Right.
But I think there's also like a real, I mean, when I sense into like the nature, right, and the totality of the presence in the cosmos, like it seems to be this feast of awareness, right? And underneath all of these individual awarenesses, from the awarenesses of the trees and the insects and the birds and the people, and, you know, it's like, I think all of that awareness feeds into one central, you know, hologram somehow, you know, of presence and awareness. And so I don't know if it can hold it all at once in some way or how that works, but it does feel like there is a unitive, you know, space, you know, where all of, you know, like each individual thing is known and held by the divine, the Mother, Father.
In some kind of a dimension or matter that we can't see, but we're in it, we just can't see it.
Right, we live and move.
If you could see it, if you could see it, it might look like a gazillion little spinning whatevers.
Quantum field, right?
Yeah, a quantum field. If you could see it, but you can't see it.
Exactly, and it permeates. You know, this is the multidimensional level of the reality beyond the three dimensions, right? And the you know. So there's the transpersonal dimensions, but then there's this unitive dimension that it's all connected. So, and to then again take that and bring it into, you know, a personal relationship, because, you know, I was just reading and sharing some stuff about what the guide has about relationship, you know, and he's saying, you know, relationship is life, you know, and God, you know, like what we give most and receive most in this movement of relationship. And even God, you know, the unity of God had to cleave itself in two so that creation could begin, because creation is, you know, this differentiated relationship that's ongoing with all of the different particles of the one that had to, you know, become many in order to be in relationship and to establish this amazing journey of life. So he says, you know, this total fulfillment can come only as you totally surrender to the will of God, without any reservations in every large and small aspect of your life and your being. We have discussed this so often, yet how difficult it remains. We have our little corners of holding out, of believing that our self-will knows better than God what makes us happy. And yet Christ is here to give you eternal life, safety, and total fulfillment if only you trust him and give yourself to him. You will be sustained with all the juices of life and joy and a constant flow of renewal. So, you know, again, you know, it's like, I think it's a little bit of a mystery. Like, how can Christ give us that stuff, right? You know? But I think here is where it's also a funny thing, you know, like maybe we don't have anything we need materially, right? Maybe we're suffering a lot, but if we knew God loved us, would that make a difference, right? And how much of our our suffering in life comes from our own self-judgment or our fear that, you know, we don't love ourselves, that God doesn't like, you know, so then we have this hard pain of the separated state from God, right? And so like the whole way of listening and connecting with this presence, you know, so we can be guided, I think is being spoken of here as well. And so, you know, at least to, you know, open, I think somebody else was talking about, you know, just being in that space of sitting with him, you know, waiting to see what happens, you know, not reacting to every little thing, you know, going into the reactivated will initially, you know, so you know, that's one way certainly that I think is what you were saying, Yvonne, you know, that you give yourself to him, right? And he goes on, he says, you cannot eliminate your fears and your distrust of others unless you constantly renew the practice of total surrender to the highest within yourself. For you cannot subsist alone, no creature can. All created beings hang together on a chain of interdependence, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. When the weight of dependence is put where it belongs, on God, on his personalized aspect, who is personally near you, then you can create a healthy center of gravity anchored deep within your soul, for that is where to find him. His presence merges with your higher self, and you truly become one. And there's something in this that, you know, I remember hearing Arena speak to as well, you know, like, so, you know, a lot of our difficulty is in the recreation of childhood hurts, right? Where the parents that were supposed to, you know, see and love and acknowledge us in the way that we needed as children, right, you know, didn't show up. And so in some ways we continue to have these dependency needs that are unmet inside of us. And then, whoops, sorry about that. Stupid thing. Hold on. So, you know, there's this sort of way where, you know, where when the dependence, like our parents are imperfect, you know, the weight of dependence didn't work so well when we put it on them, right? And so that's where the wound is, right, and everything. And so to transfer and move into our adult self, right, and hold our child, like, again, it feels like we need the Russian nesting dolls, you know, the adult needs to be held by the divine principle in some way, and then hold the child so that there's this, you know, sense of the dependency needs, because we're small, we're physical, we have pain, we have suffering and struggle and, you know, apparent limitation, right? And so even as adults, we still have dependency needs. And yet when we try to put them, hang them on, you know, our mates or, you know, our best friends or whatever, sometimes that, you know, is like not the appropriate place, right? Certainly they can help, sometimes they are really there for us, right? But when they're not, this is where we need to, you know, not feel totally abandoned, but remember that really the main anchor, the main resource is always with us, and we can connect with God. It's one of the hymns that we sing in the church that says, you know, it's the love of God that makes us all happy. And it does. It feels like, you know, in spite of everything else, if I have God's love, I can be okay, right? So say if that seems, you know, true for you. Open for anybody to chime in here if you want.
So that's definitely true for many parts of me. There are still parts that come up that don't believe it, but I'm finding more and more that I can stand in that place of I don't know and not demand that I believe something or figure out something. I am more and more able to just stand and say, I don't know, and that's okay. And those parts that in the past were very rigid and combative against certain things like this are softening progressively.
Right. And you know, maybe too, that like when you say, you know, how this real place of not knowing, you know, like you know, maybe the opposite place for your child, you know, was like some feeling, you know, that we had to know, we had to get it right, we had to, you know, to be okay, you know, we had to know, right? And so this sense of the connection, I think, with yeah, like the larger bowl of the mystery of time, of, you know, waiting to see what really is trying to unfold, what God's up to in some way, right? You know, does, you know, keep allowing us to pause, to soften, to just be present to what is. And then I think the more that we do that, the more that we're not interfering with what is trying to happen, right? And we're also in that moment of presence. And to me, presence is this place where we are connected to the heart and to God. And so if we're just in that waiting to see and we don't know and we're present, to me, that's when the guidance, the inspiration, you know, something can come through. And I would not have imagined, you know, like it just kind of pops in, or sometimes it is a feeling if I'm in distress of, you know, calming or, you know, support in some way. I find almost spontaneously sometimes when I'm being triggered or reactivating or having some difficulty, you know, that I do go to a kind of immediate breath and prayer, you know, that is calling for the light, calling for, you know, it's like this automatic awareness. Oh, I'm in trouble now. Help me, God. You know, show me, or, you know, I'm here, you know, come be with me. And I'm, you know, waiting on you. I'm trying to hold this without reacting right now. So trying to help me calm, help me, you know, relax into this a little more. So, and I find that that's often useful. And they say, you know, our prayer of God shouldn't be, you know, to take something away, right? But to give us the capacity for, you know, understanding and working with it well, right? So he says, without the proper center of gravity in God, that we become confused, live in fear, distrust our judgment, and are either, you know, distrustful in the wrong place or gullible in the wrong place. So, you know, it's sometimes really hard, you know, we're working that, right, to make the clarity of it. So he says, my beloved friends, make it your business now to deepen your desire for personal contact with Christ. Strengthen your commitment to him, or give over all of your life to him in the total trust that he deserves. Your human fears can never be assuaged otherwise. So I'm just kind of playing as I'm reading this with, you know, this thought, well, if somebody doesn't have this connection with Christ yet, or they kind of maybe are a recovering Christian, you know, and that kind of triggers them, you know, this personal contact with Christ, you know, is, you know, coming too close to some of the old distortion, then, you know, what would be a step, right? What's the guide calling us here to, if you took the Christian Christ Jesus aspect out of there, right? What is he asking us to he's saying, deepen your desire for personal contact with, can we say spirit? With love?
How about your personal truth?
Okay. That seems like that can get a little, I mean, you know, maybe truth with a capital T, that, you know, it's like, I mean, the personal part, but that can be small and little self, right? You know, and so here I think, you know, he's asking our higher self, right? Could be another because he's saying that there's this merger of the Christ and the higher self, right?
Yeah, to me, it sounds like just anything beyond your little ego,
Uh-huh.
something beyond your egocentric experience and maybe greedy and fearful kind of way of experiencing the world.
Right. And so I think a lot of times, we also, it helps to work with people, of where their connection might be. So, like often even, in the Shema, you have your animal guides, or your animal totems and things like that, that also become sort of archetypal, beyond self or transpersonal of, of the self, so that they can help us as well, right? And then the angelic realms, all of those kinds of things. But I think, again, in all of those cases, it's like one has to feel, that something like that would want to come to you, want to, be with you, help you, be in relationship with you. So tune in and see, like, do you yourself feel, like, I guess I'll say this, like when I first came into the daimyo, I had a Dickens of a time, because like, and it probably wasn't even the daimyo, it was probably just my unconscious stuff, right? There was this, place where I really did feel like it was, this potent other thing, beyond, that could lead me to something much greater than myself, and yet, in this deep desire for it, I was also completely terrified of it, right? Like that it would not receive me, that would, turn its back on me, or, and so when I was not always in a comfortable place or whatever, and not clear interpreting it, what would come up would be, my own deserving in some sense, right? And my own self-judgment and my own idealized self-image. So it was like a real battle for about 5 years in the works that my fear and my shame and my self-judgment would come into the works. And as much as I longed to present myself, to in this way, right, before the divine, right, because it felt like it was like really real. I remember we also did these leap of faith workshops at Seven Oaks, right, where we would create the divine altar and work in, connecting our relationship with that, right? So it was kind of an upgrade of that, working with this very potent, entheogen. So, it was like very clear to me, in that, like the level of shame and feeling of unworthiness that at least I carried in my being. And so stepping into the light, in that way, had to, clear and remove a lot of that, and open to a place where I finally could acknowledge, some of, not only my, higher self, not only my lower self, but that sort of both and feel like God still loved me, right? To be my real self, and know that the light, was in no way rejecting me, right? And all of that, I'm sure, came out of early images and was a kind of healing. But I found that it was a very powerful healing, and I think that this is somewhat of what this lecture is speaking to as well.
In other words, I mean, were you saying that you felt like you needed to reach a level of purification before you were worthy of?
It was not even on a conscious level, I don't think so much, Frank, but, we would open the ceremony, and, the idea would be, that you're here to connect with God, right? And that the sacrament can give you an avenue to that, we don't ordinarily, are aware of or have in that sense. And so, just the possibility that I would make that connection was something that I longed for intensely. and yet unconsciously I was terrified of, right? Like it was kind of like, if you can imagine, I don't know, like, you know, the most important being in the universe to you that you wanted to connect with, you know, that was a, you know, a great being in some way, right? You know, so it
Right.
seemed so far beyond, you know, and you were to come up and have an audience with
Yeah.
that being, right? And there's a way that deep inside of us, having that kind of a direct audience, right, feels, at least for me, you know, like it had to be healed, the fear of that, you know, and time and time and again, I had to, you know, clean and work with that God could see me,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
and it was okay.
Yeah.
I think it may be something with what you're saying too, Yvonne, you know, just in sitting with, you know, with Jesus in that way, right? You know, I don't know if that relates at all, but I would imagine that even to get to the place where you could sit across from him, you know, in whatever you were in and hold and wait, that there must have been, you know, some kind of a process inside that helped you to feel that he was interested in sitting with you, or, you know, was something like that.
Yeah, and I'm going to sign off, but I would just like to say I've had quite a few experiences where I have felt on such a profound level the total lack of judgment or condemnation from this, instead feeling that every single part of me is the beloved in his eyes, and he sees nothing of what I think of myself that is different from him. And I have experienced that in such magnificent ways, beautiful visuals, as well as just embodiment. And it's not just me, it's for each and every single one of us. And the whole concept of the spiritual world is very different than what we know here. I totally get his concern for me as an individual, for Frank as an individual, for Darlene and Natalie and Jacob, because the spiritual realm, there are no individuals. And I don't really have words to explain it, but it is absolutely delightful. And it's very real. It's more real than what I experience around me very often.
Right.
So I'm signing off.
Okay, great. Thanks. Glad to have
Okay.
you.
Y'all have a good evening.
Yeah,
Good
you
night,
too.
Yvonne.
All right.
Kind of makes sense what she was saying. If there's no need to be concerned about the individual spirits in the spirit world, then you can put all of that spirit attention on the incarnated beings that really that came to do the work.
Yeah. You know, I definitely feel, you know, absolutely, and not even, you know, just with sort of disembodied God, but I feel that same absolute love from all of nature, right? You know, from my environment around, from the forest, from the stream, from, you know, it's like, and it's kind of like this, you know, very intimate, cozy, you know, kind of thing that, you know, I remember as a child, you know, like I love to participate with the different aspects of nature. And then there was something in the development that, you know, we kind of objectified it. And so it wasn't a relationship anymore. And so you didn't feel in relationship so much with it, you know, and so I was, you know, I was depressed. I lost something, you know, in that. And so a lot for me has also been regaining that beautiful relationship with all of the, you know, other beings that, like she was saying, you know, we're all so important here in very many ways. And it is another way I think of thinking about it again is that, you know, that the that it's all God being expressed in all of this diversity, right? So we are made of God's substance, right? And God needed to become, all of these different viewpoints and all of these different experiences, including the negative ones, and because God's just like wants to experience, right? And wants to experience everything. And each one of us is a vehicle for that, that experience that's, amazing and rich and developing, so maybe God is evolving through us, right?
Wow.
So awareness of the connections in the microcosm of your personal existence inevitably also makes the universe comprehensible in an entirely new way. You must then see that everything has purpose, that nothing is for naught, that there is a magnificent design at work whose purpose is to bring everything to perfection, to bliss, to oneness, and therefore to ineffable peace. You can no longer doubt the design behind events when you explore your microcosm painstakingly, honestly, and courageously. And when you see the fabric of wisdom, of purpose, in all that comes to pass, you will simultaneously recognize the great spirit of the Creator at work. And so I can say also, like this, I think, develops as we grow in time, in age. Like I always had believed this, but the more hindsight in our story that we have, the more events that we've gone through and discovered, what we thought was terrible is all good, and we understand and see the, positive outcomes and things that we would have, resisted or questioned originally. Like, so the more we've gone around the wet medicine wheel in life, I think the more this kind of gets ingrained in us through our own direct experience, especially when we have a path like this that points it out, right? That helps us comprehend that this is, happening, and then we can be aware of it, and be, receive how it's actually unfolding in that way. When you work with the aid of the personalized God who is always available to you, always responsible when you reach out for his help, you will gradually establish connections that were totally obscure before. Nothing could be more painful and more frightening than the disconnectedness between a painful event in your life and its inner cause. Its appearance seems inexplicable and inconsequential. To establish the causal connection is relief, release, liberation, and enrichment beyond description. So, and I think that's really generally true. And I think that there's also true that there are many things in our lives that we never fully, at least in the moment, I think, comprehend. And sometimes we have to revisit, the pattern or the dynamic. And sometimes I think, it will wait for the life review after we've passed. I'm always very hopeful that we get to do that. Like I want to understand more fully, once I'm on the other side, hopefully those things that I haven't quite fully comprehended here. But there exists a certain rhythm that you need to discover, sense, and accept. So I like rhythm, right? And many other of his lectures talk about this. Ebb and flow function according to a very specific rhythm, a rhythm that has been established under higher orders. This rhythm is never broken. Only when specific upheavals interfere, such as earthquakes, tidal waves, or human destructiveness, is the rhythm temporarily disrupted. The sea is in crisis, so to speak, but the crisis conspires to reestablish its unique rhythm, its harmony with the rest of creation. The sea has the wisdom to follow this pattern. Humans, with their disruptive minds, too often make themselves insensitive to their unique rhythm patterns with which they need to be in harmony. So I think this is really beautiful, and kind of like Kovat, I think, is helping us tune into this a little more, like, the outer force of the rhythm of, work life and all of that. And I'm, watching this, because sometimes I'll still go back into, more of a pressured place, and I always get unhappy and, not so much in harmony when I do that. And so it's another, reinforcer and kind of goal in life to just be present and listening and catching the wave, so to speak, right? Surfing life and waiting for the right timing. I have a hymn I might share with you at some point with that. It's like, all you need is arriving in its divine timing, right? Relax. You can you can just wait on the Lord. And then, so he says, when you seek a connection between an event and your inner person, when you work to recognize it and pray for help, and the answer still fails to come, you may be out of rhythm. So the waiting time may be then used to find qualities within yourself which you can learn only in the times of ebb, never in the times of flow. And this is also, I think, speaking to our time, like this whole COVID thing as a affected kind of a collective global ebb and flow, that the planet has needed as well. The time span of the ebb and flow of the sea, of high tide and low tide, is never exactly the same. One lasts longer than the other, measured in earthly time, and time relationships often change. And it's the same with the human being's rhythm. The time of fruition may come sooner in some areas. The time of waiting may last longer in others. So does everybody recognize that? Again, being from, an elder generation now, I see the young people coming in, with a lot of tension and, sort of angst and not able to sense this rhythm as well as I can. So I usually try to, just support them in exploring it a little bit. It's, something that, as we come into our center as well and just present. So he says, sense your rhythm in all things. Feel your daily life in accordance with your personal universal rhythm pattern. It exists as definitively as you carry your life pattern within your soul substance. If you work, rest, play, live, move, and have your being in harmony with your unique rhythm pattern, you will live a much more fruitful, creative, joyful, and peaceful life. Much harassment and restlessness will fall off your burdened shoulders. So see, if you relate to any of that, anybody want to chime in here? How is this relating to your own specific experience of life? Can you connect?
I would say that personally, I hardly ever feel like I'm in that comfortable rhythm.
What do you feel rather than as like a kind of agitation or pressure or slow or too fast?
Anxiety, pressure, stress. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Life is stressful. It's like, what? It's like my fantasy vision that like maybe one day I will live in a hut in the woods and everything will be peaceful. It's kind of a stupid fantasy that's always in my head.
So, and this is where, like, I think for me anyway, like that's a beautiful place where the work happens, right? Because more and more I see like how, just these, doesn't have to be any deep, childhood dynamic is just the human condition in some way, right? Where we have all of these, outer pressures and distrust of time and fears and things like that, and the inner pressures. And so it's like, just to kind of, in the awareness of them, be curious and seek, like, could I, in this moment, just sit back. I find myself when I get in like that, I'm like in front of myself, like I'm, actually, it feels like my spirit is in front of my body and I'm being, sort of anxiously grasping and being pushed at the same time, and it's kind of like I literally need to feel that. And then I get the sense, oh, I just need to like come back into my, like sit in my seat, right? And be with myself. And then I can sense a different flow. But I also have to like look at, okay, so what's got me spinning, right? Is there some deadline that I'm, working at, or is there some, pressure that I've got on a situation? So I might have to see what that is so I can like literally recognize, well, that's not true, or I can take that off, or that doesn't help, so that I'm internally, whatever I might be pressuring is gone. And I might think that there's a need for pressure, so I need to, question that, right? But it is in kind of coming back into the moment now in our body that I think it helps to ground that and breathe and release for at least a moment. And then, I'm automatically hooked back up into it again. But the more we can kind of create these pauses in that and these little spaces where we come back in, I think that builds and stretches out over time. So we, and we begin catching it and we begin choosing differently. No, I see, I don't need to do that right now, right? And so hopefully all this is to say that rather than thinking of it as a fantasy of when you get to some place else, right, when you can do that, it might be, a good practice just to bring it in and notice and make that kind of the cutting edge of where your work is right now, exploring that a little bit more.
Yeah.
I find those kinds of things are really valuable. And the guide has a bunch of lectures, on the masculine and feminine currents. And, like a lot of his stuff is very energetic and, these larger universal flows and things like that. And so how I find those is less in the concept and more just in the energy of my body and helping myself chill, relax, like recognizing that it's a lie that I need to have any pressure to get anything accomplished, right?
Yeah, and it sort of goes back to the, trust. And it's like,
Amen. Yeah.
if you just trust in the process of life, you'll have everything you need and you won't be so anxious about hunting and gathering for it all the damn time.
Right. So everybody just in this, do that, just see, can you sit back, like life is flowing through you, and your body is the vehicle in a sense, right? Going through life, but also life is going through you. And then we just need to like trust that flow and sit in the vehicle, right? Come into and breathe and relax. And that's where pleasure is, and that's where guidance is. And, so that really is, I think, a huge part of the work is just to learn to relax a little more. Let's see. I just want to read the rest of the words to that hymn. So it says, all you need is arriving in its divine timing. Relax, relax, waiting on the Lord. And then I say, forgive my impatience when I want to push the river. Relax, relax. You can let it carry you. Resting in this flow, I can hear the voice of God. Relax, relax. Just be a space of love. And in the space of love, God's current carries me. Relax, relax. Surrender to be held and carried through. You are an instrument, and you're fashioned by God's hands. Relax, relax. You have a place. Take your place here in this band. right? Long, you're carried, you're loved. Everything you need is arriving. And that's kind of like what, you know, we're like seeking to do on that positive visualization thing. And then of course, everything that we notice triggers another response, right? Is just that grist for the mill. What, you know, why do I believe that it's not, I can't relax right now? You know, why, what is the unconscious tension in my body that's not trusting, is not in faith? So we keep looking at that.
Yeah, what I notice for myself, and those are, you know, just beautiful reminders. But what I notice for myself is that part of me thinks by keeping a certain amount of tension and pressure, I'm not going to miss anything.
Yeah, good.
Not often true, because sometimes I end up missing things just because I'm more tense and more dense.
Exactly.
But yeah, you know, when I think of different challenges in my life that I've gotten through and certain things I've accomplished, I often remember feeling pretty tense. But I'm not sure. I guess now maybe I could experience that a bit differently in some ways, just kind of moving and trusting that it's fine even if it falls through.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
But a part of me doesn't want it to fall through, right? It just holds this pressure and focus. I guess maybe that's the word. I think the tension to some part of me is synonymous with focus and action and doing and moving. And so,
Gotcha.
yeah, so it's difficult for that part to totally relax, but I definitely see the wisdom in the words that you're saying, because I guess I can be still moving in that moment and not be totally wrapped up in maybe the fear or the forcing, the pressure.
That's it, right? Yeah, and you know, the guide said, I mean, you know, it does feel to me that the active principle, you know, like does require a certain amount of contraction, right? You know, like to focus, to, you know, but it's a very set, like, you know, just that much and no more, right? And to notice where, you know, we do feel like somehow, you know, we have to pressure it or effort it a little bit more, and you know, that usually does come from some kind of fear or control. So that's where the surrender comes in, you know. And so yes, you don't want to blow it, or you want, you know, you want it to come out the way you're hoping, but you know, at some point it serves us better to surrender that result, you know, and just be in the flow, in the moment. And then that result will manifest at its highest, rather than, like you said, when we are sort of feeling like the ego has to do it, right? So yeah, so just to keep exploring that, you know, because it's so beautiful to just kind of keep noticing when we're in that tension of effort and how much of that is really necessary, right? And how much can we relax a little more and enjoy the journey a lot more. So let's see, we got a few more minutes. So he says, you have all learned on this path what a constructive response to a painful event is. What can I learn here? What could my response be to the seeming delay that would most further my development? If there's anything in my lower self that I'm not yet aware of or sufficiently connected with, I want to see it fully without ever losing sight of the fact that God loves me and I am God's unique expression. So, you know, the blending of those two, you know, like it's so hard to see our lower self, to face our lower self, our imperfection, if we don't also affirm and know deep inside of this, you know, a love ultimately. So these are positive responses that will help the rhythm to take its harmonious course. In its own time, often when you least expect it, new connections will open up, sometimes pouring out with such rich profusion that suddenly all woe will disappear and the suffering will turn into the blessing it always had the potential to be. So again, I've had those experiences, right? Oops. What did I just do? Yeah. So, not sure where if I'm landed in the. So yeah, I must be back up here because that's on aggression.
We've already been to page 6. You got to go the other way.
I'm going the wrong way. Okay. Oh, that's 8.
Yeah, there it says your aggression.
Where is it? I'm not finding it.
I think we were on. I think we were on page 7.
I don't remember reading this. All doubt is evil.
Do you have a different lecture up now?
Yeah, maybe I do. Oh, here it is. Okay, so this is what I was just reading, I think. I read a minute ago. Let's see.
Pouring out.
Yeah, there's where it is. Yeah, okay. So again, I say that personal contact with Jesus Christ will help you to live in harmony and make all the necessary connections. But here too, the rhythm pattern is at work. Mentally, you may completely reconcile to his reality, and you may use your personal will for total surrender. You may sincerely mean it. Yeah, I mean, you may not have experienced the emotional reality of Christ's sweet and loving presence. You may wait for this to happen. You may become impatient and then begin to doubt, thus disrupting the seed you have sown. When the emotional experience fails to materialize for a while, it is not that he keeps you waiting. It is that your inner barriers need to give way. That can happen only within the context of your unique personal rhythm pattern. Remember that and do not despair. Christ is here. He hears you. He loves you. He protects you. He's deeply concerned with you, even though your senses are still too dull to perceive it. The time will come suddenly when you will be intensely aware of this fact. You will feel his loving, healing arms in which you can always rest and find new sustenance for your life task.
Might not come in this lifetime, but
You know,
eventually it will come.
right. And I think in different, like it is a kind of rhythm. And I know for me, like I was so frustrated and struggled for 5 years, thinking something was wrong, that I wasn't getting it right. And it did turn out to be exactly what he's saying, so all of the struggle and the frustration was, not necessary, right? It just made it harder on me. It wasn't that it was terrible or, like I was bad for it, but, it was like, it was just a part of, had I understood then, that things do kind of have their own timing, and, whatever that time was, that, the undoing and the unraveling of all of the things, and the ability for me to come into that deeper contact. And I would still like more. I would still like it to grow, right? So it's still in process. But certainly to have some sense of this in some way, even if it's a kind of vague, or, like to have some sense that you can feel the loving divine arms around you, I think is a very beautiful, useful, experience. And if you can't, again, if it's not there, it's not like something's wrong with you, but to continue to look and see what is blocking that, perhaps, and then, allow and trust that it's coming and will absolutely be there for you. You're not left out, you're not abandoned, you're not denied or rejected by God in any way, even though you're still in a struggle or you still don't have everything that you would long for and need. All doubt is evil, but since evil has no permanent substance, you can easily dispel it. Bring your positive aggression to bear upon it, which is very contrary to what you usually do. By habit, you put all aggression into service of lower self aims while keeping in apathetic in an apathetic passive attitude toward the good you desire to receive from life. Or you are passive and apathetic when you are enveloped in the negativities that stem from your unpurified self and that therefore draw evil forces to you. So some of the ways that I understand this, right, you know, is like we can have a positive aggression also to, you know, in our choice, like, you know, we get a temptation coming to us, right, you know, and, you know, it's kind of like, get thee behind me, Satan, right? You know, we recognize it and we say, no, I'm not going to channel that energy right now, right? You know, we're tempted to go into negativity or darkness or reactivity in some way. And it's almost like one of those negative specialists is, you know, sort of in there, you know, wanting to tempt us into these lower realms, right? And so I think what he's saying here is that we're not used to like recognizing and just like rebuking it, saying, no, you know, I'm not going there. It's my choice. I'm a divine human being. I will choose something else. So that's something to play with and explore, right? To, you know, assert the positive, you know, and use aggression, you know, in a way to affirm the light within you. So visualize yourself taking a firm stand against all thoughts that are negative and divisive in any way. Seriously question any thoughts that seem correct, but fail to give you a feeling of peace, love, and unity, that make you feel disharmonious in any way. So this is, I think, another excellent way, like, you know, just to pay attention to how the thoughts are landing in your body, like, you know, because we're talking about this agitation in our bodies and, you know, like all of these pressures and senses. And a lot of the times it's being driven by the thinking processes. And so one of the things that helps is to, again, lose your mind, come to your senses, right? You know, stop thinking and just feel what's there in the body. And then, you know, to become from a little more objective distance aware of, you know, what those thoughts were and, you know, how they do create agitation and whatever in us. And they can be relatively mild thoughts, you know, they don't have to be really traumatic or difficult, you know, but almost any thinking activates us in some kind of anxiety and pressure. So it's another reason why, you know, meditation is good, you know, to come out of the mind, to drop into just breathing, just being, you know, looking at the beauty of nature or whatever works for you, to just be present, right? And not in the mental production of thinking all the time. So being willing to let in the light of truth, the truth of God, rather than your temporary perception of truth, will create a shift in your consciousness. And, you know, this is so beautiful. I mean, you know, like he always says, like, whatever is there, like, ask, what is the truth? And I have found that that's a very beautiful question, right? It takes us out of our right, wrong, or, you know, good, bad, or all of the different inner conflicts, and helps us begin to, you know, find the ultimate truth and, you know, take the divinity out of the distortion and bring it all together. When you visualize yourself surrendering to God's vision, you will find out the truth of any particular situation. You will be enlightened and you will lose a tremendous burden. The relief and liberation are enormous, especially if you do not have too big a stake in your egotistic self-righteousness. However, if you feel personally humiliated by being wrong, by being imperfect, or by having made a mistake, it will be much more difficult for you to let go of the tight hold of your position. The reason is that you secretly hold a low opinion of yourself. The lower this opinion is, the greater must be your stake in some prideful, egotistical, self-elevating, self-righteous position. You know, so again, you know, we're talking here just about like where we, you know, that duality of right, wrong, good, bad, okay, not okay, right? You know, needs to be let go of. And the truth is, you know, found really more in the both and in the, you know, the humility, right, of just being a human being on earth, you know, that can make mistakes, that, has limited perspective and perception and has wounds that, you know, so we don't have to be prideful, right? We can be our real self, and that's so much more grounded and, you know, helpful. So he says, please, my friends, remember these words well, because here your personal contact with Jesus Christ is, again, your best solution. Only through allowing yourself to know and later to feel his love and total acceptance of you are you now, no matter how flawed, imperfect, and destructive your lower self may be, will you be able to do the same. Only then will you trust your ultimate divine nature. And then you will be able to afford the luxury, if I may put it this way, of accepting your distortions, your sins, if you will, without losing the ground under your feet. And this is the healthy position which allows you to reach truth and harmony with yourself, with others, and with life. So I think we're coming to our end, so I'm going to skip a little through here. It looks like we've got a bit of the lecture yet that we hadn't gotten to. See what his closing, sometimes he summarizes a little bit.
Those 3 points that you just glazed.
Right.
That was sort of a summary in a way.
Okay. So the personal aspect of salvation seems contradictory to the mind that is steeped in the dualism of either or. Let me present these 3 paradoxical aspects. Only you yourself can affect your salvation. It is your responsibility. You cannot possibly do it alone. You need the help of others who share the journey with you and who may often see what you do not see. And without God, without the personal assistance of the personal aspect of God, the undertaking is too vast for you to accomplish. These 3 categories may no longer seem contradictory. So I'm going to... Working with others, being open to and with them fulfills the law of brotherhood. I spoke about this many years ago. There are spiritual aspirants who deceive themselves that they can reach the goal by seclusion and separateness. They have their rationales, but the truth is that they never want to expose themselves to others and thus have their success. Thus, whatever their success, it can at best be only half measured, that cannot last. How could you ever overcome the hurdle of your self-hate that festers underneath all your defenses if it were not for the experience of Christ's personal love, forgiveness, acceptance, and total vision of you? How could you learn to love yourself without at least knowing and finally experiencing his love for you? You know, and again, this is what that child needed and didn't get from the parent and is still hungry for, right? And, you know, and in some ways, you know, we can't. We need it, you know, we have to have it, but we can't get it from necessarily, you know, our parents or our human, you know, friends. But then, you know, through this divine aspect, we can receive it and then pass it on. So how could you activate the power to change involuntary aspects that do not directly respond to your outer will? The outer will and the outer aspects that respond to it need to be aggressively activated by your dedication to your path, by the many daily decisions to face the truth in difficult or confusing situations, by your choice to fulfill the law of brotherhood and overcome your initial resistance to showing yourself as you are. But then comes a point in which you deal with involuntary emotions, responses, reactions, and even beliefs that do not respond, no matter how sincerely your outer self wants to change them. So you constantly need the higher powers to help you find the way into those deeper levels and effect a change that your own mind alone cannot bring about. All this also teaches you the wisdom to distinguish between where the self is the master and where you desperately need the great master, without whom nothing can be accomplished. My beloved friends, take in these words and make them your own. They will enlighten you and will help you toward the state of mind that you so yearn for. They will open new doors that will make a personal experience of Jesus Christ possible for you. Whenever you allow this to happen, all doubts about his reality will vanish. Once you are held in his arms, consoled and encouraged by his sublime tenderness for you personally, rocked with all the comfort only he is capable of giving. You will never doubt again, although you may, of course, lose the feeling experience and need to recapture it again and again until your entire consciousness is filled with him who is in you. His blessings, the blessings of his angels, are here with all of you. Listen and sense the reality of this blessing. All our love accompanies you every step of your beautiful path. Work for the greater cause. Your own cause that may seem selfish will be furthered through it. Be who you truly are. Okay.
Wow.
So yeah, very beautiful, powerful lecture. I'm going to have to go through and read some of it we didn't get as well, but hope everybody enjoyed what we got to it. And anybody want to say anything in closing?
No, only thank you. That was very powerful.
Yeah. Thanks, Darlene.
Yeah. Okay. Good night, everybody.
See you
All right.
next time.
Next time.
Bye.